I am Roald Voss, an astronaut with NASA. These words will likely mean little to you, but when this transmission reaches Earth, if it still exists, perhaps someone will understand what I'm about to report. I don't know how much time I have left before everything collapses again. My hands tremble as I grip the controls of the rescue module. I'm being pulled back to safety, away from the frozen depths of Titan. But I don't feel safe. Not after what I've seen. The first glimpse of Titan hit me like a punch to the gut. Imagine a lunar landscape, but shrouded in a thick, yellowish haze that swallows any trace of sunlight. The surface below appeared lifeless, yet there was something more out there. Something alive. When our sensors pierced through that opaque layer of clouds, we discovered vast, dark lakes scattered across the icy crust. They weren't made of water, but of liquid methane, ethane, and other exotic compounds. Those lakes were strangely beautiful, reflecting the faint streaks of light that filtered through the toxic atmosphere. Their texture was oily, almost organic, as if they were sleeping creatures waiting to awaken. Our mission was simple: explore those alien lakes. There were theories about microbial life hidden beneath their surfaces. No one imagined what we would actually find. The main ship remained in orbit while I led the exploration team down to Kraken Mare, the largest known methane lake in the solar system. 70,000 square kilometers of pure darkness. It looked like an open mouth, ready to devour anything daring enough to enter. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" asked Elena, my co-pilot, as we adjusted the engines of the amphibious rover designed to navigate these alien waters. Her voice sounded steady, but her eyes betrayed the same unease we all felt. We were standing at the edge of the absolute unknown. "Only in nightmares," I replied, trying to keep the tone light. But inside, a chill ran up my spine. This wasn't natural. Nothing here was. The descent into the lake was surreal. As we slowly sank into the icy liquid, I felt as though we were being watched. Maybe it was just paranoia, but every sound picked up by the sensors seemed to echo with intent. Every bubble escaping from the sides of the vehicle felt like it carried some encrypted message. Kraken Mare wasn't just a lake, it was a submerged world. Beneath the surface, visibility was minimal. Artificial lights cut through the darkness, revealing vague shapes that danced at the edge of our vision. It was hard to tell if they were rocks, currents, or something else. Then it happened. Sudden impact shook the rover. The alarm blared, bathing the interior in red flashes. "What was that?" shouted Marcus, our biologist. He was leaning over the monitoring screen, his fingers flying across the panel. "I don't know," I responded, trying to stay calm. "It could be a technical malfunction." But then came the second impact. Stronger. More deliberate. Elena let out a sharp scream as something slammed against the right side window. I instinctively recoiled, my mind struggling to process what I saw. A long, translucent, pulsating form pressed against the reinforced glass. It had thin, delicate tentacles that moved like antennae of giant insects. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, glowed with fractal patterns, as if containing entire miniature galaxies within them. "This can't be real," Marcus muttered, his voice trembling. "This doesn't make sense." "Retreat," I ordered, activating the rover's thrusters. We needed to get out of there. Now, but the creature didn't let us go so easily. It began repeatedly slamming against the hull, emitting low, guttural sounds that vibrated through the liquid methane. It was as if it were trying to communicate with us, or warn us. We managed to escape, but not without damage. One of the thrusters was compromised, and our speed dropped drastically. For hours, we drifted in silence, surrounded by that hellish sea. Every creak of metal, every external noise made my heart race. We knew we weren't alone. Later, while analyzing the data collected during the encounter, we noticed something disturbing. The creature wasn't unique. The sensors detected similar forms moving in the depths below us. Some were larger, much larger. Marcus suggested they might be predators, hunting in groups. But there was something more sinister about these creatures. They didn't seem to be hunting for food. They seemed to be studying. "They know we're here," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. They're watching us. Those words hung in the air, heavy as lead. I wanted to deny it, but I couldn't. I felt it too, that nauseating sensation of being watched, as if we were intruders in a realm we were never meant to touch. Before ending the first day, we reached an unspoken agreement. No one would mention what we'd seen to the orbital base. Not yet. We needed to understand what we were dealing with, before causing unnecessary panic. Besides, part of me, perhaps the most selfish part, wanted to keep exploring. I wanted to understand. As I lay in my makeshift cabin, I heard the distant sound of something scraping against the hull. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A constant reminder that out there, something massive and incomprehensible swam in the dark. I fell asleep thinking of glowing eyes and translucent tentacles, of galaxies trapped in pools of methane, and of something much bigger, something we hadn't found yet. But deep down, I knew it was out there, waiting. I woke up to the sound of static. For a moment, I thought it was just the constant hum of the rover, but then I realized it was coming from the communication radio. Someone, or something, was trying to connect with us. Communication from the orbital base, said Elena, her voice tense as she adjusted the controls. They're asking why we didn't update our status yesterday. I swallowed hard. We knew keeping silent was risky, but there was no way to explain what we'd seen without sounding completely insane. Tell them we're having technical difficulties, I replied, avoiding eye contact with her. We need more time. Elena hesitated but nodded. She knew as well as I did that the truth would likely cause panic, or worse, force us to abandon the mission before we could figure out what was really out there. As she spoke with the base, I went to the side window and stared out at the dark methane sea. The yellowish haze above seemed thicker today, as if pressing down on the lake, forcing it to reveal its secrets. But it remained silent. And that was the most terrifying part. "Roward," called Marcus, his voice almost a whisper. He was leaning over, one of the monitoring screens, his eyes wide. "You need to see this." I approached slowly, dreading what I might find. On the screen was a graph displaying readings from the underwater sensors. There was movement below us. A lot of movement. "They're gathering," Marcus said, pointing to the blinking dots on the monitor. "They're coming for us." We didn't have much time to react. A violent impact shook the rover, throwing all of us against the walls. This time, it wasn't a single blow. It was multiple. The creatures had surrounded us. "Turn on the thrusters! Now!" I shouted, rushing to the control panel. My hands trembled as I tried to activate the engines. The rover rocked dangerously, as if being pushed by invisible currents. Elena managed to stabilize the vehicle, but the damage had already been done. A thin crack appeared on the right side window, where the first creature had pressed its translucent body. The reinforced glass held, for now, but for how long? "We have to get out of here," Marcus yelled, his voice almost hysterical. He was frozen, staring fixedly at the crack, as if expecting something to emerge from it at any moment. "We can't just run," I shot back. "If they're predators, they'll chase us." But he was right. There was no other option. I maxed out the thrusters, forcing the rover to ascend toward the surface. The engine roared, struggling against the dense liquid surrounding us. Then, it happened again. A gigantic shadow passed through our field of vision. It was larger than anything we'd ever seen. Its tentacles seemed to span the entire length of the rover, enveloping us in a deadly embrace. The sensors could barely register its dimensions. It was as if that thing didn't fully belong to our world. "This isn't possible," Elena murmured, backing up until she hit the wall. Her face was as pale as paper. I managed to guide the rover out of the creature's reach, but not without cost. One of the thrusters failed completely, leaving us adrift. We were stranded on the surface of Kraken Mare, vulnerable and exposed. Hours later, as the initial panic began to subside, we analyzed the data collected during the confrontation. What we found was even more disturbing. The creatures weren't attacking randomly. They were coordinated. Every movement seemed to follow a specific pattern, as if executing some kind of ritual or elaborate strategy. "They're testing us," Marcus said, his voice low and full of fear. They want to know what we're capable of. And what does that mean? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. It means they're not just animals, Elena replied, finishing his thought. They have intelligence, maybe even consciousness. That idea chilled me to the bone. If these creatures were intelligent, then what we'd faced was only the beginning. They were learning about us, and we barely understood how to survive them. We decided to explore the edge of the lake, searching for a way to escape, or, at the very least, better understand what we were dealing with. Using underwater drones, we managed to capture clear images of smaller creatures, those that seemed to act as spies or scouts. They were grotesque, but also fascinating. Their translucent bodies allowed us to see internal structures that pulsed with their own light. They looked like bioluminescent organs, but they functioned like something far more advanced. The fractal patterns in their eyes constantly shifted, like languages written in code. They're trying to communicate, Marcus suggested, examining the images. These patterns might be a form of visual language. Or maybe they're just distracting us, I replied skeptically. We need to focus on surviving, not deciphering alien hieroglyphs. But he insisted. If we can understand what they want, maybe we can avoid another attack. Reluctantly, I agreed. While Marcus worked on the data, Elena and I began repairing the rover. Every minute we spent there was a calculated risk. We knew the creatures could return at any moment. It was during the night, or what we considered night on Titan, that we received the signal. A pulse of energy coursed through the rover's sensors, originating from the depths of the lake. It was unlike anything we'd ever recorded. It wasn't biological, not exactly mechanical either. It was something in between. This can't be natural, Elena said, her fingers flying over the control panel. It looks technological. Marcus appeared at my side, his eyes gleaming with a mix of fear and excitement. What if they're not just creatures? What if they're part of some kind of system, like living machines? The idea was absurd, but it made sense in a twisted way. The creatures seemed both organic and artificial, as if designed to serve some greater purpose. Maybe they're protecting something, he muttered, looking out at the dark lake beyond. Something in the depths. Before we could discuss further, the sensors detected intense movement below us. The creatures were returning. But this time, something deeper, something colossal was stirring in the depths. Elena screamed when the external camera briefly captured an unmistakable image. It was a massive shape, with eyes larger than any creature we'd encountered. Eyes that seemed to peer directly into our souls. They're not the only ones here, I whispered, feeling the weight of that realization. There's something much bigger down there. The rover shook again, forcing us to grab onto the walls. We knew we couldn't stay much longer, but now, more than ever, we needed to understand what that abyss was hiding. Because deep down, I knew we weren't dealing with mere creatures. We were dealing with something ancient. Something we might never have been meant to awaken. There was no going back now. The rover was damaged, our supplies limited, and communication with the orbital base was intermittent at best. But the real problem wasn't our precarious state. It was what lay below, in the depths of Kraken Mare. That brief glimpse of the colossal gaze still haunted my mind. They weren't just eyes. They seemed like portals to something beyond human comprehension. They glowed with a cold, pulsating light, as if alive, or perhaps conscious. Every time I closed my own eyes, I saw that pair of giant orbs staring at me, assessing, judging. We need to figure out what it is, Marcus said, his voice almost a whisper as he reviewed the images captured by the sensors. He seemed obsessed, as if this mattered more than our survival. If this is some kind of alien intelligence, we need to understand its intentions. Intentions? I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You really think they have good intentions? Because so far, all they've done is try to kill us. Elena intervened before the argument could escalate. Roward's right. We're dealing with something hostile, but we also need to admit that these creatures, or whatever they are clearly protecting something. Maybe that massive thing down there is the key to all of this. Her logic was undeniable. If we wanted to get out of here alive, we had to face the abyss, even if it meant diving straight into Themoth of hell. We decided to use the most advanced underwater drone we had on board. It was small, but equipped with high-resolution cameras, thermal sensors, and a data recording system capable of operating even under Titan's extreme conditions. Marcus suggested outfitting it with a full-spectrum camera, able to capture frequencies invisible to the human eye. If there's something down there emitting energy signals, we need to see them, he explained, adjusting the drone's final parameters. This might give us a clue about what we're dealing with. While Marcus worked, Elena and I prepared the rover for the inevitable return of the smaller creatures. We reinforced the sides with improvised metal panels salvaged from non-essential parts of the vehicle and recalibrated the remaining thrusters to ensure we could escape quickly if needed. I hope this is enough, I muttered, testing the strength of the repairs. Because if those things decide to attack again, I don't know how long we'll last. Then let's hope the drone does its job fast, Elena replied, her expression grim. She knew as well as I did that we were betting our lives on this mission. We watched in silence as the drone slowly disappeared into the dark depths of Kraken Mare. The cameras transmitted live images to the screens inside the rover, but the quality degraded as the drone sank deeper. The darkness was almost total, broken only by the faint flashes of artificial lights mounted on the device. The first images showed what appeared to be irregular rock formations at the bottom of the lake. But then, something changed. "Do you see that?" Marcus asked, pointing to a distorted structure on the screen. It looked constructed. There were too many straight lines, too many precise angles to be natural. "It's a structure?" Elena asked, incredulous. "How can something like that exist here?" Before we could speculate further, the drone captured something that made my blood run cold. A colossal shape emerged from the shadows, completely blocking the camera's view. It was impossible to calculate its exact size, but it seemed to fill the entire field of vision of the drone. Pull back now!" I shouted, though I knew the drone was already programmed to return automatically if it detected danger, but it was too late. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving us in silence. For a few seconds, none of us spoke. We were paralyzed with fear. Then, something happened. Something I never imagined possible. The communication radio, which had been silent since the start of the mission, came to life with a distorted sound. It wasn't static. It was different. A low, continuous hum, accompanied by rhythmic patterns. As if they were words. "They're trying to communicate," Marcus said, his eyes wide with both fascination and terror. "These sounds, they might be a language." "Turn it off," I ordered, but he ignored me. He was hypnotized, completely absorbed by the idea of deciphering the alien message. Elena approached him and yanked the headphones off his ears. "Don't you get it? This isn't an attempt at dialogue. It's a warning. Or a threat." But Marcus didn't give up. He kept adjusting the controls, trying to isolate the sound patterns. "If we can understand what they're saying, we might figure out how to negotiate with them." "Negotiate?" I asked, my voice full of disbelief. "With something that just destroyed our drone? You really think they'll listen to us?" He didn't answer. Instead, he furiously typed on the keyboard, trying to translate the patterns into something comprehensible. That's when I noticed something strange. The sounds weren't just coming from the radio. They were echoing around us. I looked out the window and felt the air freeze in my lungs. Out there, in the dark, something was moving. It wasn't just the smaller creatures. It was something bigger, much bigger. The yellowish haze above the lake seemed to be dissipating, revealing vague, indistinct shapes just below the surface. Shapes that resembled faces. "They're here," Elena whispered, backing up until she hit the wall. Her voice trembled. "They're watching us." Marcus finally stopped fiddling with the controls and looked outside. His face was pale, but his eyes gleamed with a mix of fear and fascination. "It's her," he said, almost in a trance. "That thing down there. It's calling to us." Before I could respond, the rover shook violently. This time, it wasn't external impacts. It felt like something was pulling the vehicle downward, dragging us into the depths. "Turn on the thrusters," I shouted, rushing to the control panel. But they barely responded. We were being sucked down. When we finally came to a stop, we were surrounded by gigantic shapes floating around us. Their silhouettes were grotesque yet majestic. Thin, delicate tentacles moved in complex patterns, as if performing some kind of ritualistic dance. And then, I saw it. Through the front window, a colossal face emerged from the shadows. Its exact appearance was impossible to describe. It seemed to constantly shift, as if made of pure condensed energy. But its eyes, those enormous glowing eyes, fixed directly on me. It felt as if my soul was being exposed. I could feel every thought, every memory, every secret being ripped from me. It was unbearable. "Roward!" Elena screamed, shaking me back to reality. "We need to get out of here!" I managed to reactivate the thrusters, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. That thing, that entity, wasn't going to let us escape so easily. As we struggled to break free, I heard something I'll never forget. A low, guttural sound, like 1,000 voices whispering at once. It came from all directions, enveloping us in a suffocating embrace, and amidst that cacophony, a single sentence echoed in my mind, clear as crystal: "You shouldn't be here." We were dying. Not physically, not yet, not all of us, but something inside me had already broken. Titan wasn't just a hostile place. It was a living, pulsing world full of secrets that should never have been touched. And now, we were paying the price for our curiosity. Elena was dead. I could still hear her screams echoing in my mind as she was dragged into the dark depths of Kraken Mare. Her last sight was the same thing that had haunted us from the beginning. Translucent tentacles and glowing eyes, larger than anything we could comprehend. She didn't stand a chance. Marcus, on the other hand, seemed more determined than ever. He was obsessed, consumed by the idea that these creatures, or entities, had something to teach us. To him, Elena's death was just an inevitable obstacle on the path to discovery. To me, it was a cruel reminder of how insignificant we were here. "Roward, we need to go back," Marcus said as he adjusted the rover's sensors. His voice was steady, but I could see the tremor in his hands. "There's so much more we can learn." "Are you insane?" I shot back, my patience at its breaking point. "They killed Elena. They're hunting us. And you want to go back down there?" "We're not here by accident," he replied, his expression grim. "These creatures, this entity, they're testing us. If we understand what they want, maybe we can survive." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him we were dealing with something beyond human reason, something that didn't care about us. But part of me knew he was right. We weren't facing irrational animals. This was intelligent, calculating, and worst of all, it was watching us. As we repaired the rover, Marcus continued analyzing the data collected during the previous dive. He was fixated on the sound patterns captured by the radio, those distorted hums that sounded like words. "Listen to this," he said, connecting the headphones to the main audio system. A series of deep, reverberating sounds filled the small compartment of the rover. They sounded like human voices speaking in strange tongues, overlaid with metallic clicks and pops. "This isn't natural," I muttered, feeling a chill run up my spine. "It sounds technological." "It's a language," Marcus corrected, his eyes gleaming with a mix of fear and fascination. "An advanced form of communication, and I think I can translate part of it." He spent hours working on decoding algorithms, isolating frequencies, and mapping patterns. When he finally found something, Heist's expression changed completely. He looked both exhilarated and terrified. "Roward, you need to hear this," he said, his voice trembling. He pressed the playback button again, but this time, the sounds were replaced by clear, though distorted words. "You have disturbed the slumber. You have violated the silence." My heart froze. It was as if that voice were speaking directly into my head, echoing through every thought. I looked at Marcus, hoping he'd say it was some kind of error. But he only shook his head slowly. "The entity knows we're here," he said. "It's judging us." Before we could process the meaning of the message, we were attacked again. This time, it wasn't a single creature. It was a swarm of them. The impact started softly, almost like experimental taps. But they quickly intensified, shaking the rover violently. The interior lights flickered as alarms blared in unison. "They're trying to get in!" Marcus shouted, running to check the ceiling systems. But it was too late. With a deafening boom, one of the smaller creatures managed to breach the side of the rover. Elena was closest to the gap when it happened. Before we could react, she was pulled out, her scream cutting through the air like a blade. I tried to grab her, but my hands closed on empty space. The last thing I saw was her silhouette struggling against something invisible in the dark waters before she disappeared completely. "Elena!" I screamed, my body trembling with rage and helplessness. But there was nothing we could do. We were trapped, defenseless. Marcus was frozen, his eyes fixed on the spot where Elena had vanished. "They took her," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "They chose her." After the attack, we managed to temporarily seal the rover and escape the smaller creatures, but we knew it wasn't over. The colossal entity was still down there, watching us, waiting. Marcus began speaking feverishly, as if guided by some external force. "She's calling us," he said, his eyes glazed over. "That thing down there, it wants us to come back." "Have you lost your mind?" I asked, incredulous. "They killed Elena. Why the hell would we go back?" "Because it's the only way to understand," he replied, his voice full of conviction. "If we go to her, maybe we can negotiate. Maybe we can learn." I wanted to argue, to tell him we were dealing with something that had no interest in negotiations. But something inside me hesitated. Part of me wanted to know, wanted to understand. We decided to make one final dive. Not because we had a choice, but because we knew we couldn't escape without facing the truth. The rover was on the verge of collapse, but we adjusted the thrusters for a controlled descent. As we sank deeper, the darkness seemed to swallow everything around us. The artificial lights barely penetrated the density of the liquid methane, and the sensors began to fail. Then, something happened. A pulsating light emerged from the depths below us. It was faint at first, but quickly grew in intensity, illuminating gigantic shapes dancing around us. The smaller creatures were guiding, or herding us towards something larger. "There," Marcus whispered, pointing to a massive structure emerging from the shadows. It looked like an alien construction, but it wasn't made of stone or metal. It was organic, as if it had grown there. And then she appeared. The colossal entity emerged from the shadows, its form impossible to fully describe. Its eyes glowed with a cold, relentless light fixing directly on us. It was as if it were assessing our souls. "She's watching us," Marcus said, his voice almost a whisper. "She's deciding." Without warning, Marcus opened the rover's hatch and jumped out. I tried to stop him, but it was too late. He swam toward the entity, his movements frantic. "What are you doing? Come back!" I shouted, but he didn't hear me, or pretended not to. As soon as he touched the energy field surrounding the entity, his body began to disintegrate. His flesh turned into light, and his final words echoed in my mind. "She's awakening." With Marcus gone, only I remained. I knew I had to get out of there while there was still time. I maxed out the thrusters, forcing the rover to ascend toward the surface. But even as I fled, I felt the entity still watching me. Titan was changing. The ground trembled, and the entire ecosystem seemed to be reacting. Something bigger was beginning to emerge. I am alone now. Marcus is gone, Elena is dead, and all that remains are the echoes of their voices in my mind as I struggle to keep control of the rover. The vehicle is on the verge of collapse, its systems failing one by one. But I can't stop. Not here. Not when I know that something far greater, something unspeakable, is awakening in the depths of Kraken Mare. As I ascend toward the surface, I feel as though I'm being pulled back, not physically, but by an invisible force, something that seems to penetrate my mind and memories. It's the entity. It's still there, watching, evaluating. And now, it knows who I am. When I finally broke through to Titan's frozen surface, the silence was deafening. The yellowish haze seemed thicker than ever, as if trying to suffocate me. But I knew I wasn't alone. Smaller creatures floated around me, their translucent bodies glowing faintly under the rover's lights. They didn't attack. They just watched me, like sentinels. I decided to make one last attempt to understand what lay below. I activated the external sensors and pointed them toward the abyss of Kraken Mare. What I saw made me question whether I truly wanted to know the truth. Far below the surface, there was an immense alien structure, something that seemed alive. yet also mechanical. Its forms were fluid, constantly shifting as if growing or breathing. It was impossible to gauge its exact size, but it appeared to span square kilometers. Was it a temple? A prison? Or something even more sinister? Then, she appeared. Again. The colossal entity emerged fully, her form impossible to describe. Her eyes, those two massive orbs glowing with cold, relentless light, fixed directly on me. It was as if she were trying to communicate, sending telepathic messages I could barely comprehend. "You have disturbed the slumber." The words echoed in my mind, as clear as any physical sound. I knew this wasn't just a creature. It was something ancient, something that existed long before Titan was formed. And now, because of us, it was awakening. I remembered Marcus's final words. "She's awakening." He was right, but not in the way he imagined. That entity wasn't merely an alien intelligence. She was a guardian, a jailer. As I analyzed the data collected by the rover, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. The colossal entity wasn't the true danger. She was protecting something far greater, something that slept in the depths of Kraken Mare. Something that, if unleashed, could consume not only Titan but the entire solar system. The sound patterns captured by the radio began to make sense. They weren't just a language, they were a warning to anything that dared disturb the slumber of that thing. And we had done exactly that. I knew I had to get out of there. The rescue ship was on its way, but I had only a few hours before it arrived. I decided to send a transmission to the orbital base, reporting everything I had discovered. I left nothing out. Not the creatures, not the entity, not what Marcus and I had seen at the bottom of the lake. But as I recorded the message, I felt something strange, a presence, as if the entity were watching me through the camera. I paused, for a moment, looked around, and then continued. There was no time to hesitate. Finally, the rescue ship arrived. They pulled me out of Titan, wrapping me in warmth and safety. For the first time in days, I felt something close to relief. But then, it happened. As the ship began to pull away, I looked out the observation window. Titan was down there, its surface dark and mysterious. But something caught my eye. Deep within Kraken Mare, two gigantic shapes emerged from the shadows. Eyes. Two enormous eyes, each larger than the colossal entity we thought was the main threat. They glowed with a different light, brighter, older. They stared directly at me as if they knew I was there. My entire body trembled. There was no doubt that this was something beyond human comprehension, something that shouldn't exist in this universe. Before I could scream or warn anyone, the yellowish haze swallowed Titan once more, hiding that colossal gaze. But I knew they were still there, watching, waiting. Back aboard the orbital station, I reviewed the footage recorded during our escape. The external camera briefly captured those gigantic eyes before losing the signal. I showed it to the crew, but no one could explain what they were. To them, it was just an anomaly. To me, it was a cruel reminder of what we had awakened. For days, I reviewed the data, trying to find some way to understand what we had faced. But the more I learned, the clearer it became. This was something we couldn't fight. Something we couldn't control. And then one final message echoed in my mind. It didn't come from the radio or the sensors. It came directly from the entity, or perhaps from what she was protecting. "You should not be here." My transmission to Earth was met with skepticism. Some believed me. Others dismissed it. But I knew that eventually the truth would come to light. Titan wasn't just a distant moon. It was a gateway. A prison. And now, because of us, something is awakening. If humanity ever returns to Titan, it will be to face something that should never have been disturbed. And when that happens, I hope they're prepared. Because deep down, I know those eyes are still there, watching, waiting, and hungry